My name is Tony Harrison. I have the privilege today of talking with an old and dear friend, Congressman Bill Clay from the state of Missouri, the city of St. Louis, and on behalf of the Black Power Chronicles, which is an oral history project of the old members of SNCC in trying to record our history and make a record of our history that might not be in the normal history books. So we have the privilege of having Bill Clay here with us, and it's an honor, Bill, to have this opportunity.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to appear with an old friend like you to rehash something from the years
long time ago. Yeah. Well, I wanted to start out by sort of talking about Missouri, because in preparing for this, I went back and did a little reading on the history of Missouri and then how that bled into your political career. I didn't realize that Missouri was the northernmost slaveholding state, and its actions as they interacted with Kansas made a major contribution to the start of the Civil War.
Yes, but Missouri was part of that compromise, you know, right. The great compromise, that after that, no states could come in, one would come free, one would come slave. But we, in Missouri, even though it was a slave state, they only had one law that insisted on, or that demanded separation of the races, and that was in the field of education. It was against the law to have mixed races being educated in the same building, same room. Otherwise, it was by custom was what happened. But they were just as rigidly segregated as Mississippi and Alabama and Louisiana and the other southern states.
Not by law, but by custom.
By custom, right.
And that bled off into the divisions that took place within the politics of Missouri.
Well, that's the other thing. Now, there was never any real effort after Reconstruction to deny the vote to black people.
Oh, okay.
And so, you know, like in 1930, 31, the black citizens in St. Louis sponsored an amendment, a constitutional amendment, bond issue in St. Louis to build a hospital, a $1 million bond issue to build a hospital that, and in the language it says, would be for black people, would be run by black people from the top to the bottom. They passed that bond issue, and the Republican mayor and the Republican-controlled Board of Aldermen diverted the money, the $1 million, for street lights and sidewalks instead of building the hospital. And the black community was furious. When Roosevelt got elected in '32, the Secretary of Interior came in, and of course the black people elected a Democrat. They
right.
had all been, they were responsible for electing a Democratic mayor. And Bernard Dickman was his name, and he brought in Roosevelt's cabinet member of the Interior, Ickes, and they brought the $1 million in, and in 7 years they built that hospital. It became
under federal authority.
It was controlled by the city, though.
Okay.
It was they replaced the $1 million. It was Homer G. Phillips Hospital, 600-bed hospital with 1,000 employees, controlled, all of them black, from the top down to the bottom.
Now, what year was this?
1938 it opened. And for the next 20 years, 75% of all the black doctors in this country interned in that hospital, Homer G. Phillips Hospital. But see, when I started running, when I personally got involved in politics, there were 50,000 blacks in the city of St. Louis registered to vote.
Now, you were, somewhere I've got it in my mind, and you correct me, I had it in my mind that you were also on the city council.
Yes, I was on what they call the Board of Aldermen.
How long were you on the board?
5 years.
Okay.
And then I got elected to the as a ward committeeman, Democratic committeeman, because that's where the patronage was established. See, we established our political system after Chicago, and their aldermen, and so the committee people control the patronage. So I gave up the board of aldermen to become the committeeman, and also to decide who would go in 30 jobs that went.
Right.
I mean, it wasn't no he passed or didn't pass. Those were my jobs. And from that, I was able to form a political club with some real power and influence with other people. Because if they wanted support, because we could deliver the vote.
Y'all could dog trade off.
Yes, and that's what happened.
Now, you were active in the labor movement?
I was active in civil rights and labor, too. I worked for the State, County, and Municipal Workers Union when I was on the
Which is current day AFSCME?
Yeah, with AFSCME, yeah.
Right.
And on the Board of Aldermen, I was employee, an agent for them. And later I was involved in integrating the construction unions.
Okay.
And so I worked for the plumbers and pipe fitters union in St. Louis. In fact, I took 15 blacks in an integration program that I helped structure, and then they hired me as the coordinator for the integration program.
So that's on the side of the building trades, where we still today have problems with the integration of the building trades and getting black participation in those trades.
But the ones I integrated, we had no problems because we made a commitment that for the next 10 years or so, when you took a white one in, then you had to take a black one in.
Okay.
In fact, it was kind of comical because the newspapers and all had predicted that we were going to have massive retaliation from the white members. So the second day after it went into existence, I'm in the Union Hall, and I look out there, there's a demonstration out there, these white people were marching. So I said to the head of the union, I said, what's the problem? He said, these are the people that were in line to be hired. They said we didn't bring enough blacks in. So
that they could get hired.
Yeah, they wanted some more blacks to be taken into the union so they could come in.
Now, what year did you go on the city council?
In 1959.
Okay, and you stayed there 5 years.
Until 64.
And you came off of the city council and went into a ward leadership position.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And how long did you stay in the ward leadership position?
Oh, probably 15 or 20 years. Even after I got elected to Congress, I kept that. It was a non-paying position, but it was a power position. Yeah.
Right.
So,
now, you all had, back in the day, somewhere I've got it in my mind, that you all had a reasonably effective political organization in St. Louis.
Oh, I think we did. We elected governors. We were responsible for Carnahan being elected governor of Missouri, for several mayors being elected, and for several being unseated.
So in the spirit of the power that had been centered in the black community through this political piece, the Black Power movement that had started down in the South was already, in a way, alive and well in St. Louis in the framework that you all, that was in the mid-60s.
Well, of course, the power structure, I mean, the protest started in St. Louis right after the turn of the century. In fact, when the first black elected to Congress, the priest from Illinois got elected in 1928, we came within 5,000 votes of electing the first black to Congress from Missouri in the same election. So, you know, as I said, there was no effort to deny the black people a vote in the state of Missouri. And so they even had that, they had enough power to almost elect a black to Congress in 1928.
So what happened that didn't get followed up on more quickly right after that election to then go back, since you lost on that time, to go back the next time around?
There was follow-up because, as I said, in 1930 they passed the bond issue.
Okay.
To appropriate $1 million to build that hospital.
But you were the first to get elected to Congress out of Missouri.
Right. Yes.
So in
but
that.
no, we had black elected officials. When I got elected to the Board of Aldermen, there were already 4 blacks. Okay. On the Board of Aldermen, and I got elected with another black. So it was 2 of us, which increased it to 6. And before I left, it was like 9.
Out of how many on
out of 28.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were about a solid third of. It evolved to be that you were about a solid third of the Board of Aldermen.
Yes, and also. On the same day I got elected to the Board of Aldermen, there was a minister who got elected to the school board, the first black elected to the school board. Okay. And the story I want to say is his name was John Hicks. Years later, when I was a member of Congress and on a cruise, I met a musician, and he said, "Oh, you from St. Louis?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "My good friend is John Hicks, the famous jazz pianist." And I said, "Yeah, I know. I have never met him, but his dad and I were elected on the same day." So he got his singer on the cruise. She said, "I got Hicks's number." She got Hicks on the telephone.
Oh, get out of here.
And we talked, and he said, "Well, I'm going to be in St. Louis 3 months from now." I said, "I'm coming to see you." And I did. I went to see him. That's when I met him. John
that's
Hicks.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
Now, so you went from and kept the ward membership for how long after you were in the Congress?
Probably 15 years.
Now, what made you decide to run for the Congress?
Oh, I thought it was about time that we had a voice at the national level. Okay. And and then we had a black in the state legislature who actually
Who was that?
Troop, Pal Troop.
I know Troop.
Yes. No, not the one that was.
I knew the son.
Yeah, his son.
Okay.
Or his nephew. You knew his nephew.
Okay.
His name was Troop. Yeah.
Right.
Quincy Troop.
Quincy Troop.
Right, and so his uncle drew the district.
Okay.
That in violation of all the Democrats wanted. They had a Democratic governor that was opposed, the Democratic majority in the House and the Senate, they were opposed, but he structured a deal with the Republicans and some outstate Democrats to draw this district, because what the Democratic Party wanted to do was to marginalize the Democrats.
They wanted to cut up the black piece and share it around to other districts.
Well, and then they were going to annihilate the influence of Democrats in the rural community. I mean, of Republicans in the rural communities.
Okay.
So we made a deal. He made a deal because he was the one that orchestrated it with the Republicans in the metropolitan St. Louis area and the Democrats in the agriculture area. And we drew districts that preserved some influence for the 3 groups.
Okay.
Yeah, and the governor filed a lawsuit. Of course, the courts
dismissed it.
Yeah, they dismissed it. They said, "Oh, no, you can't discriminate."
So that was the byproduct of the troop intervention.
Yes.
And manipulation of the body politic.
That's right.
That created the district that allowed you to run.
Right, yes.
Now, the climate around that time, that was around 68.
Yes, it was 68.
Right. That was when all of the movement that was taking place across the country. So you were a part of that evolution of our politics following the passage of the Voting Rights Act, but it didn't have a direct impact on your engagement because you all had the vote and access to the body politic for many years, many years before that. But you went in during that whole post-Voting Rights Act empowerment that took place in the South.
Right. Well, see, I had been a instrumental part of CORE
Oh,
under Jim
okay.
Farmer, and
Okay.
I mean, and we were agitating then. You know, we started the city. I mean, the
Not the drive, not the
yeah,
bus.
yeah, the
I know
Freedom
Freedom Rides.
Yeah, we
that
were the
CORE
ones-
was a principal
right
architect of.
And part of it, we started an experimental program in St. Louis. We moved across with some people into Illinois and rented buses, and then went down through Arkansas, Mississippi, testing the facilities in the bus stations.
So what happened, you know, that has been completely lost.
I know. But see, then what happened was CORE made it the national program. They took it up to Washington,
Right.
and then it started up there and went down through the Carolinas and
And it
into
subsequently
Georgia.
brought
yeah.
us Alabama and the bus ride
Right,
and the
yeah.
Freedom Rides in Alabama that got bombed and folks
Yep.
got beat up. That's a
Yeah.
part of John Lewis's
Legacy.
history,
Yeah,
legacy, and that
right.
history. I had no idea, never heard of the work that you all did there coming out of St. Louis into Arkansas and those other and Illinois and those other surrounding states.
Well, see, we didn't run into the kind of opposition. There were some places that were still would not serve us, but it was no violence. And so,
Okay.
yeah, and so we were documenting that these places were in violation of the law, in violation of the travel bans that the commission had said you could not
Right.
segregate in these facilities for interstate
commerce.
travel. Yes.
Right.
So we were to test people from out of St. Louis and Illinois going into Arkansas and Tennessee and Mississippi, and then the national took it up over
And that's then what ended up being televised.
yes, and in
led to-
in Alabama,
Right.
yeah,
Because we had big conflict in Alabama.
I know.
It ended up being Anniston, Alabama, which is about 50 miles east of Birmingham,
You
and
don't
then the Birmingham with the organized Klan and the organized city government that was in league with the Klan.
Well, you don't have to tell me about Anniston, Alabama. I was stationed there.
Oh, get out of here!
I was there when the Supreme Court issued the separate but equal decision. And of course, I was the one that upset that plant, that base down there,
That's
Fort
the
McClellan.
the depot, the Anniston Depot.
No, Fort McClellan.
Oh, okay.
And see, they were not abiding by Truman's law, executive order, and the law that was passed. And Eisenhower was the president when I went down there, and he was still trying to enforce the law, but they had barbershops that would not cut blacks'
Right.
hair. And so I organized a boycott of the blacks on posts. And for 2 months, none of us got haircuts, see, because I worked at the commanding officer's level. So he came in one morning and he said, I'm ordering you to get a haircut. And I said, oh, I'll go right now. Come on with me. Let's go down and see
Right.
if they will cut my hair. He said, no, you know you got to get it in town. I said, then pay twice what these white soldiers are paying on.
Right.
He said, you either get a haircut or we're going to court-martial you. I said, fine, that'll be good because Ebony and Jet got photographers on their way down here now because we've already reported what's happening on this post-storm. I said, on Thursday nights, we can't go in the club because you bring white girls in from Anniston and the
Okay.
blacks can't go in. I said, and we got some other things since you want to play hardball.
Right.
I lived off post. I went back to my house and my wife, I said, we need to integrate that swimming pool.
Oh, yeah.
We lived in a housing project, so
Okay.
we got us some black kids, told them to put the swimming suits on. We going swimming. We drove out to that post and jumped in the pool. And so some guy in a swimming suit, he came over, he said, I order you to get out of the pool. I said, and who are you? I'm Lieutenant so-and-so. I said, where are your bars? He'd had on a swimsuit.
Right,
so
right.
When I got back to the unit, the colonel said, we're going to transfer you. I said, what about the court martial? He said, we're going to transfer you. He gave me a whole stack of places where I could go. I said, well, I'll go back where I came from, Missouri, about 100 miles from my home. And you know, he put me on, transferred me, and gave me 3 weeks travel time
to get
from Anniston, Alabama, to Missouri, Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri.
Now, how far is that from St. Louis?
About 90 miles.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, where's mom and daddy fit into all of this? You were all politically engaged. You were involved in the politics. You were involved in the labor activities. You were part of a union. How did all that come to be? And what, daddy was a school teacher, lawyer, dentist?
Oh, no. My daddy was a skilled mechanic. He was a settler torch man. He had the same job for 30, 40 years.
Now, was he a part of the union?
He was a union official at the job where he worked.
Okay.
He worked in Illinois, across the river from where we lived. We lived like 8 blocks from the Mississippi River.
I got you.
And so he worked across the river. He was the lead of the union over there, but it was a small union.
Okay.
They cut up boxcars, trains, boxcars, and then the company out of Chicago sold the scrap metal or whatever it was. But no, he worked the same job for about 35 years.
So you were of a good union paid background, middle class, African American.
Yeah, growing
up,
stable family.
And mama was what? A housewife?
Yeah,
or did she do school teacher?
She had 7 children.
Oh, okay. She was solidly a housewife.
And of course my dad was kind of in the neighborhood. We lived in a tenement house, and he was one of the stable people there. So in the neighborhood, he helped a lot of people because he made good money.
Right.
And he helped a lot of people. I mean, some families, we had some couldn't feed the kids.
Right.
Well, they had people in the neighborhood who could feed them.
Everybody looked out for everybody
looked
else.
out for them. I had a couple of guys I know would come by at least twice a week to eat, you know.
Okay.
But,
so then that is a part, that background and that stability was a part of what contributed in his union membership and engagement, even across, based over in Illinois, also contributed to your sense of freedom and your sense of the freedom to engage?
No, not that. That was just a little small company he worked for.
Right.
It might have been 15, 20 people there. But our families were big, and that was part of the civil rights movement and the political movement. My dad and my mom came from Missouri slave owners.
Okay.
And the family had come, and my dad had 8 brothers and sisters.
Oh my Lord.
And my mom had 8 brothers
Y'all had
and
a big
sisters.
army.
So when I had a picket line, I mean, family, they still there, and nobody left St. Louis.
Okay.
Our family's still in St. Louis. I go back often now because for family reunion just a month ago, you know, and we still got all these people there. So the civil rights movement was enhanced by the Clay family,
right,
who had hooked up with other families, like the Troop family was big like that, and a couple of others. And so
this is immediate post-Reconstruction in which this agrarian making babies family thing was still alive and well.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
And see, so, I mean, our family is still in St. Louis. My son is in Congress.
Right.
So his base is family and friends of our families, you know. He's been there for 17 years now.
Yes.
Yes.
And doing a pretty good job.
Thank you.
Carrying on Daddy's legacy.
Well, I tell people he's an imposter.
Oh,
He's impersonating a congressman.
Oh, get out of here. But look, so let's go back to what was the catalyst for the caucus being organized? Well, I remember Diggs, I remember you, I remember, who else was a part of that?
Nix.
Nix. I didn't ever get really to know Mr. Nix. That was Philadelphia.
Yeah. Well, in 1968, 3 blacks for the first time in history were elected to Congress on the same day. That was Lou Stokes,
right,
Shirley Chisholm, and myself.
Okay.
Already,
and that was 68.
68.
Okay.
Already there were 6 blacks who were operating under something they call a Select Democratic Committee, which was an arm of the Democratic Party in the Congress.
Okay.
So with the 3 of us being elected,
and those were all these Northeastern guys at that time.
Well, Northeastern
and Midwestern,
and
Chicago.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
And so, and then we just added to the Northwestern
right.
and Midwestern. But see, the first black elected in the 20th century was in 1928, was Oscar DePriest from Chicago.
Right.
He served 3 terms, and then he was defeated by a guy named William Mitchell, who was a Democrat.
Okay.
Who served 4 terms, I think. He was elected in 33, and he served 4 terms.
4 terms.
And then Bill Dawson was elected in 40.
And sit there forever.
Yeah, he was elected in 41.
Right.
Yeah. And after that, so all 3 came from the same district.
Right.
But then in 45, Adam Clayton Powell was
out of
elected.
New York.
Yeah, 4 years after Dawson.
Okay.
And so.
Now, what about Nix? Then when did Nix out of Philadelphia come?
Nix came, he came after Diggs, I think.
Okay.
Then Nix, and then you had Conyers out of
Detroit.
Out of Detroit, and you had out of Nix, and you had Gus Hawkins.
Gus out of California.
California.
Right.
Those were your 6. Well, when we got there to make it 9. After we looked around and Stokes said, we ought to formalize this operation that we got here and shouldn't be an arm of the Democratic Party.
Okay.
So, but then we said, okay, we'll go along with it for a while because there's so many things happening at particular time. And that's when they had the killing of the Black Panthers in Chicago.
Right.
So we said, okay,
which produced Bobby Rush today.
Yes, right. When we went to Chicago and to investigate that, because Democratic Party was party to the killing.
Right.
And the attorney there, the Democratic attorney, he was a party to it, J. Edgar Hoover. They were all in on that.
Right.
While we were there conducting the hearings, we had 3 people, black people, to testify who later became members of the Black Caucus. And Bobby Rush wasn't one of them.
Right.
Yeah, we had Washington.
Harold
Washington. Metcalf. And
former athlete.
He had a former athlete. And Gus Savage, who was a newspaper
guy,
and so
a little rabble-rouser in his own right.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
So we had those 3 to testify, and as a result, we got the federal government involved in the investigation over and above the FBI.
Okay.
And so what happened to black people they were furious because this was outright murder.
Right.
They shot Hampton and
Fred Hampton
and the other one, Clark, and they killed them in the middle of the night. They knew exactly where their bedroom was. It was about 8 other people in there. None of them got shot. They shot up them 2 bedrooms.
And then that was a part of the COINTEL program that was implemented under Hoover's leadership at the FBI.
And so the people out in Chicago, they were outraged, and they organized and unelected the state attorney.
Okay.
they went and supported the Republican state attorney, and they beat Hanrahan was his name. They beat him by hundreds of thousands of votes. I mean, they just really, yeah.
But that also reflected about a parallel to the kind of political machinery that existed in St. Louis and the political machinery that existed in Chicago. And this was an internal rebellion against the democratic machinery there in Chicago.
Yes, and in the next election, what happened was that Metcalf replaced Dawson.
Right.
And then you had a second one. George Collins got elected there from there. And then we had blacks, Rangel beat Adam. And then we had Dellums to come in from California.
From upstate.
Yeah, from.
You had Gus down in L.A., and then you had Dellums from up in Oakland.
In Oakland, yeah. And then we had from Baltimore, we had Perrin Mitchell.
Perrin, right.
And so.
So you all had got to be a center of gravity in the number of members that you had evolved to have at that time.
Right, and that's when Stokes said, look, why don't you formalize, write papers, and asked me to write the papers. So I sat with Diggs, and we organized the charter to set up president, vice president, treasurer, et cetera, committee chairman, and all of that. By then, see, we had 12 members.
Right.
And so then I wrote in the organizational papers, I said, we ought to have a new politics, disassociated from the Democratic Party, because we need to start with, on the premise that we have no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, just permanent interests.
And which has been
was adopted,
stuck to you and attributed to you all up and still to today.
Right, because that became the motto.
Right.
And then so Rangel said, and we ought to name ourselves the Congressional Black Caucus. That's how we got the name.
Okay.
So everybody agreed. And we had been trying to get a meeting with the new president, Nixon, for almost a year, and he refused to meet with us. So with this new frame that we had, structure that we had, Stokes says, why don't we boycott the State of the Union?
Okay.
And we did. We boycotted the State of the Union, and it was all kind of hell broke loose. Even our liberal friends in Congress were saying, that's disrespectful of the office of the president. Okay. And so our response was, how come you weren't as articulate when for the last year and a half he has refused to meet with the legitimate spokespeople for black people in this country? You ain't opened your mouth. So we will be disrespectful of a person who's disrespectful of the office himself. Right. And so we boycotted it. And you know, the national news people, they gave us 1 hour to respond to Nixon, State of the Union. And
who delivered the message?
Well, we divided it into 15-minute units, and some went to Southern State.
Okay.
It was like 13 senators.
So was Barbara Jordan there by that time?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No, she didn't come until later.
No, she came later. Yeah.
And it was 11 people from the House. I was one of them. I went to Detroit along with the congressman from Pennsylvania and a senator from Connecticut, I think. And we had our 15 minutes there. And then there were four other locations. One was in Washington, D.C., and one was in the South, and one was out in California. And we responded to the President's State of the Union. Well, that happened.
This is new history.
It is. And
okay, old history being brought alive.
Right, yes.
Okay.
And then what happened was, you know, we kept agitating on the floor of Congress about his refusal to meet with us. Soviet Union and China were in Africa trying to align themselves with the new developing African nations, and were having success, and they were publicizing it all across the world. And they were also publicizing Nixon's refusal to meet with us. Finally, he caved in, and he had to meet with us in March. That's after Metcalf and the rest of them got there. And so we got a 6-week notice that he would meet with us a certain day in March. So what happened was we had people like Carl Holman,
Ed
Sylvester, Fontroy, who was a guy was
a part of the old Martin Luther King in Washington and the Poor People's March.
Yeah, and so they banked in at the Delta National Home in Washington, D.C. Frankie Freeman and Lynette, who's the executive director of the Deltas and all, they participated in pulling together black people from around the country to develop 60 recommendations to give to Nixon. And we brought the accommodations, writers, we brought educators, we brought people, experts in the health field, and to develop these 60 recommendations, which was probably the most comprehensive report on Black America ever put together, and we call it a black paper. It wasn't a white paper, it was a black paper. We presented that to Nixon.
So this would have been historically the first meeting of a collection of black elected officials with a president of the United States.
Right, as a group, collective. As a group. Because they had met with people like,
I mean, people, but not as a collective,
not as a collective
political voice.
Group. And so we met with the president. He had all of his cabinet there, and we presented him these 60 proposals. And Diggs, who was chairman of the Black Caucus, suggested that he respond to him by May the 17th, which was the day that the Supreme Court had issued the anniversary of the issuing of separate but equal.
Right.
And so he did respond. Nixon did, but he responded 24 hours later on the 18th. But he admitted when he responded to us that it took something like 200 hours and he told the number of people who had worked on the responses to us. Now, in addition to that, the initial meeting with us, Nixon, the word went out that we were going to meet. We were going to be on Meet the Press the Sunday after the meeting at the White House. So that Saturday, he called a meeting of the black supporters of Nixon's program to devise a strategy to respond to us, who was going to be on Meet the Press. So on Meet the Press that Sunday, it was Diggs, Hawkins, and myself who represented the viewpoints.
And that's Diggs of Detroit, Hawkins of L.A., and Bill Clay of St. Louis.
Right, and we responded to all of the we explained the proposals and
the responses.
And the responses,
Now, how responsive were the responses?
It was not responsive. They tried to do what they normally do, to give a good PR appreciation or this is a great country, all men are born free. We know that. But anyhow, we were on our way to establishing the new black politics. So then we said, now, if we're going to be the main spokesman for the black community, we've got to have a base. We already had an elected base because we were already, black people that said, we want you to represent us. But we had some things like some fear like the civil rights organization, NAACP and the Urban League, they kind of say, "Nah, are they gonna move us out?" Well, we had no intentions of moving them out. We were going to just establish the political agenda for our people. The other thing, the labor unions, they had real reason to fear us taking over the agenda, because all of us had gotten elected and beaten labor
in some of those circumstances.
Beat their candidates.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, 33 unions opposed me. I only had 3 unions that supported me, but I kicked the hell out of them.
Right.
And the same thing had happened with other members of them.
Oh, okay.
Perrin Mitchell didn't have the union support.
Right. I remember Perrin's race.
Dellums didn't have the union support.
Oh, yeah. He came out of the war movement.
Right, yeah. And so, they had the union. So our position was, we will eliminate the spokesman between us
and the people.
We don't need you liberals.
We don't need somebody
determining
else to
our agenda. Yeah, determining our agenda and how far we can go.
Right.
So we established that as one of our main rules, that we will establish the agenda, and how we will do it, and we will organize our support. So we started off with the ministers, meeting with them across the country. We had the educators. Gus Hawkins organized all of the blacks educators and all, and we had a 3 or 4 day conference with them. Metcalf organized the medical community, and at Meharry University met with the Black Doctors Association and Black Dentists Association. Black educators.
And that meeting was held at Meharry?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And then it was conference, like 3 days. These were 3-day conferences.
Okay.
The educational conference, Gus Hawkins had that over here in Virginia. I had a communications conference in alliance with Howard School of Communication. And so we had that. We brought in blacks in the media, newspapers, television, very few, and we outlined the program to attack the media. Okay. Yeah, to include and increase the number of blacks. In the media.
Okay.
And then you had Dellums and Chisholm, who had a conference on blacks in the military. And they went to bases around the world to point out how they were being discriminated against, not being promoted, et cetera. And so that's how we organized a national power base for the Black Caucus.
So you had a dual track going. You had your individual constituencies with the support that you had gotten elected by, and then you went out and broadened that base of support into a national network.
Right.
And if my recall is right, that was some of the sessions that the Black Caucus today is talking about was done back then.
Right, yeah.
And now, should have been under Howard Robinson's leadership as the first executive director of the Black Caucus.
Yeah, and what happened was we had the first Congressional Black Caucus dinner, which gave us the money to hire staff and to buy a building.
I remember that.
Yeah, and we had at the dinner, which was really fantastic
and unheard of.
Yeah, only the number of the hotel only accommodated like 2,000 people. Well, we must have been 5,000 trying to get in, and let me tell you, and the early people that came to the Black Caucus weekend, most of them were working for cities, for states.
Right.
They paid the expenses to get them here. But at that dinner was our principal speaker was Ossie Davis. And he laid the plan out for the Black Caucus, and that was a historic speech that he made. The honorary chairman was Nancy Wilson.
Okay.
and Bill Cosby.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, and so.
See, you making me go back to thinking about things that I was close to and had forgotten about.
Right, yeah.
Because I was Howard Robinson's support person.
Right.
So
well, he was the first Black Caucus chairman.
And Diggs had recruited him from the State Department.
Yes.
Since Diggs was a foreign policy guy within the caucus at that time.
Well, I think Hawkins really recruited him, but because we were in Japan. That's where we met Howard. He was in Japan, and Hawkins and I. Diggs wasn't with us then. Hawkins and I and Stokes were together, and we met Howard. And the State Department put him on loan at first.
All right.
For us, and so he was helping us to organize the first dinner.
Yes.
And after that, we raised enough money to hire him, and he retired. He had enough time in to retire. That's how he got.
Okay, because I know I had him tied up with his relationship with Diggs. I wasn't aware of the relationship with Mr. Hawkins.
Well, Hawkins, I was with Hawkins when we met him and brought him back. Yeah.
Well, let's come to some of more current politics as the dynamic of the history that you have talked about, and the history of slavery, the history of the politics that evolved in Missouri because there was not a prohibition against political participation, access to the vote there that led. So what were the issues that you were most active with? I know it was labor on one hand, and even though they hadn't supported you in getting you there, but I also knew that education was another. So if you think back to what were the most important issues that you feel that one you were attached to and that the caucus was pushing?
Well, first of all, let me clarify my relationship with labor. Even though 33 members, labor unions, opposed my opponent, supported my opponent. The labor union that I integrated, pipe fitters, was George Meany's old union.
Oh, get out of here.
And so when we showed up to be sworn in, that weekend and all the celebration and all, Meany gave a reception for me.
Okay.
And he had every big wheel he knew of in Washington to be there. I mean, John McCormick, Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, everybody, all of the main people, and all of them unions that opposed me. He had
them all there.
And I stood there at the door with him, and he introduced me to everybody coming in. He said, "This is going to be my man on Capitol Hill."
All right.
And so he said, he's going to represent us on the Labor Committee.
Right.
Well, this is a fascinating story. Wilbur Mills was chairman of the committee that
Ways and Means?
Yeah, but no, they had a committee that decided where who people what committees they
Steering and policy is what it is now.
Right.
Whatever it was.
That's what it was then.
Oh, okay.
And so they published a list of people what committees they were going to be on. It was in the paper. I called Meany and I said, "Mr. Meany, I want to thank you for trying to get me on the Labor Committee." And he said, "Trying? What do you mean?" I said, "I didn't make it." He said, "What do you mean you didn't make it?" I said, "I didn't make it. He put me on some other committee." He said, "Let me tell you something." I mean, he came through the phone loud and used a little profanity, and he said, "Let me tell you something. You ain't that important at this point. I ain't gonna let no country boy put short pants on me."
Right.
He said, well, the next day, I was informed that I would be on the Education and Labor Committee, and also that I would go ahead in seniority of the other people who had been appointed to the Education and Labor Committee. So
you jumped a little.
Yes, I did.
A few bodies.
Yes, I did.
Okay.
So, and I just want to clarify that in terms of my relationship with the labor unions, and it paid off for them because I became one of the best friends.
Now, didn't you also end up on Postal?
I ended up chairman of the Postal Committee. Yeah, right. But that was a secondary committee, but it was important to federal employees, people who work for the federal government and the Postal Service.
And did the Postal Service then still have any patronage connection? Or had that sort of gone by the wayside?
Oh, no, I had jobs as chairman, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I had jobs. No, it was, we had patronage.
So you had patronage coming from both the home base.
Yes.
And then you ended up with a patronage support from the federal.
Yes.
From your committee assignment on the postal side. And then you had the education and labor as the staff and the instruments to move the education and labor agenda through that.
Right, yes.
Now, who else was on labor and education with you? Gus was there, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah, Gus was there. Shirley Chisholm was there. You mean blacks?
Right.
Yeah, that I can't.
Right. The thing that I remember about Shirley more than anything else, she had been appointed to the Agriculture Committee.
Yes.
And she came back and protested.
Yeah.
That she had been appointed to ain't no farms in Brooklyn, and then she found out that the food stamp program.
Yes, right. You see
that the food stamp program was on the Agriculture Committee.
That's
and she
right.
sort of backed up off of that. It was after she found out the food stamps.
But then they did move her over to the Education Committee. Yeah. But when I got appointed to the Education Committee, Adam was there.
Okay.
See, Adam was. They put him back into Congress.
Right.
The courts did. And then they penalized him, so he didn't participate really. That's how Rangel won. He said they took part of his salary away from him. And so when they would when the press would say, well, you missed this vote and that vote, and he had a standard answer, he would say, part-time pay, part-time worker.
Hello.
So,
and he still had the base of the church.
Yeah,
but he did.
Anyway. I think he had given up. He just didn't want to be
there.
Yeah.
That whole dynamic that evolved around what had been laid off on him.
But he was a fabulous legislator.
Some folks say he is still is still the leader in the amount of legislation that has been passed by a single member.
Well, I hate to be bragging, but I passed 295 bills that became law.
Was most of that through education and labor?
Yes. Well, through education and labor and through the Postal Service. Okay. And a lot of them was legendary pieces of legislation. I mean, I passed the Family and Medical Leave Act. Hatch Act reform.
Okay.
5-year vesting in your pensions, which was very key because people they couldn't leave their jobs because they'd lose their pensions.
Right.
So I passed the legislation, 5-year vesting. COBRA, if you lost your job, you could take your insurance with you for 18 months.
Right.
Portability with your pension, you could transfer your pension from this job to another.
That's still active and alive today.
Oh yeah, and family and medical leave is still arguing. I couldn't get it paid for leave, but we did get it through after all of those years.
Now, if you think back to the time of that period in the late 60s and moving up and through the 70s, what was the rhetorical framework at that time had a lot of underpinning of the Black Power movements that were taking place in this country. Was that having much influence on the way that the politics in the caucus was taking place? Or would you all off of another dynamic that was sort of breathing also the politics of the climate then?
Well, yeah, the politics of the climate of the time kind of merged in with the protest movement.
Okay.
I mean, people who came to the blacks who got elected were not opposed to the protest movement. We were all part of the protest movement. And we brought in, I mean, the next layer of people to come in were like Andy Young, Barbara Jordan, people like Yvonne Burke.
I can tell you a quick story on the Barbara Jordan piece. Julian Bond and I were walking down by the press club on 14th and F and bumped into then the Lieutenant Governor of Texas, whose name I cannot remember at this moment. But he informed us in the course of that conversation that you all are going to get a new member in the Black Caucus, and she will be coming up here soon. And her name is Barbara Jordan. And this was like a year more out, but the deal had already been cut.
Yeah, and let me tell you, now, Yarborough was a senator from Texas. H.W. Bush had been blasting him for 5 years, how he was too liberal and all. And so Yarborough asked me to come and be the principal speaker at a fundraiser in Texas, at Houston. And so I was up on the platform, and I heard all this commotion in this thing. It was about 600-700 people. He was raising a tremendous amount of money. I heard all this commotion, and I saw people coming, and I saw this little black woman coming down the aisle. I said to myself, "Who is this?"
Who was it?
It was Barbara Jordan.
I
didn't know who Barbara Jordan was, but she took the stage and that microphone, and within 3 minutes, I knew who she was, because she said everything that I was going to say in the next 30 minutes. I mean, Barbara Jordan.
She was strong.
Oh, she was strong, and that was my first meeting with Barbara Jordan.
So you all became good friends as a byproduct of that after she got here.
Oh, yeah.
Because she was not appointed. She had not been elected yet, had she?
Well, she was in the state Senate.
She was in the Senate?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Right.
No, she was a strong person.
Yes, she was.
Yes.
Yeah.
There many moments of recall. Now, at the same time that all of this was going on in this country, you said that Gus was doing foreign affairs, and now Diggs.
Diggs was really chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. I said I was traveling with Gus on a Codell. Yeah.
So the decolonialization process that was taking place in Africa was going on around that time. So you had...
Yes, and Diggs and Conyers were really the spokespersons for it. And Conyers had legislation to penalize, to boycott companies who were dealing with South Africa and that. And of course, Diggs was negotiating for the rights of these, for these people who were gaining their independence, to have a relationship with the United States. And I remember that Diggs, Metcalf, and myself went to Africa, and we left Senegal going to Sierra Leone in the middle of the night. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning when we got to Sierra Leone, and it must have been 10,000 people out there to welcome Mr. Diggs to their country because of what he was doing for them. It was amazing. Metcalf and I just looked, hey, what's going on here?
And so that was because, now, of the flag and the umbrella that he was carrying on behalf of those independent countries as the decolonialization was taking place, and independence for each one of those.
Right, and he was giving voice to them in the Congress. You know, he was making speeches for them, and, you have to...
Now, back during that time, there was also an active, on the continent and in this country, a Pan-African kind of movement going on to try to help black folks align themselves with that transition that was going on in Africa in particular.
Well, the Pan-African movement was started back at around the turn of the century with W.E. Du Bois and people like that, and of course Marcus Garvey later on. That was, that was going on, but they were promoting independence of nations in Africa. And of course, Conyers was not liked in particular by people, the colonials. I remember we were on a trip once, and we this congressional trip. We were on our way. When we were got to South Africa, we landed in Cape Town.
Okay.
Cape Town, big city. You know, we were the only ones in the airport except for 2 ticket processors and a few security guards. Completely empty in that big town. And they wouldn't let us go into the city because Conyers was with us. And he was promoting the independence of black.
So he was in that anti-apartheid posture.
Yeah, and so we could not go into the city. The airplane, we were on a military plane, they refueled, and then we flew on down to the other city in South Africa.
Durban?
No,
Peoria?
No, the main city.
Oh, Durban, Peoria, the capital.
The capital was Cape Town, I think.
No, I think it was Peoria. Cape Town was the most
yeah, not Peoria, it's Pretoria.
Pretoria.
Yeah, that's where we were.
Okay.
Yeah, so we spent a couple of days down there.
Okay. Well, let me ask you something more immediate. The history of Missouri is that it has been dancing on being sort of the bellwether state of what's been happening in the country over the years. I mean, going back to the beginning, 1900s and on up through, that whoever was getting elected president, except for 1 or 2 occasions, Missouri had helped elect that person.
Yeah, it was the border states,
right.
You know, but it goes back even further than that. General John Fremont, he took over St. Louis and the metropolitan area during the Civil War.
Okay.
And freed all of the slaves. See, we had slaves and freedmen in there.
Oh, okay.
And so he freed all of the slaves, which the military commanders had the right to do when they captured these areas. Well, Abraham Lincoln heard about it a week later, and he rescinded the order. He put black people back into slavery in Missouri. He said, no, this is not our strategy. Missouri did not leave the Union. We are only freeing the slaves of states that left the Union, which he had no authority whatsoever. How could he free the slaves in Mississippi and Alabama and Texas? So, but he like in Tennessee and Missouri and a couple of other states that did not leave the Union, he left the black people in slavery. And he put us back into slavery in St. Louis. We were out for at least a week. We were free people. And Lincoln put us back into slavery.
But with that kind of internal conflict that has been a part of the history of Missouri, are you surprised at where Missouri has sort of evolved to be in these last 10 or 15 years, to be inching more and more toward the Republican side of the spectrum? And
well, I'm surprised that they have taken the foothold in Missouri that they are. And see, Missouri is right back with Mississippi and the rest of them trying to deny black people the right to vote. They want to go back, retrenchment in our rights and all. And so they have gerrymandered the state, so now that
you only have 2 Democrats out of it.
And they're both blacks.
Right.
And so the rest of them
sound like Alabama and Mississippi.
Right. And see, we used to have Republicans that you could deal with and relate to, but you got now the same kind of Republicans that you got in that the Dixiecrats used to be. The Democrats from the South used to all be anti-black. I mean, and so now we've got, that's an increasing number of people now that are Republicans. And so I don't know, I'm ashamed of the way some things are happening in the state of Missouri right now.
And thinking about the balance now. It used to be a balance in the congressional delegation. That's just gone away, as you just said. There are only 2 Democrats in the delegation now.
Right,
or the
Missouri.
2 black folks are from St. Louis, your son, and my friend, your friend, Brother Cleaver, Elrich Cleaver, Emmanuel Cleaver. I read something recently that Elrich was a distant relative of Emmanuel's, but Emmanuel Cleaver. So we, like in the South, the only place that we have Democrats in the South, starting basically almost from Virginia all the way out to Texas, are blacks who are the congressional members and delegations that are disproportionately white.
Right. Yeah.
Now you got coming up in the election, I think Mr. Trump now carried Missouri during the last election by a significant, almost 20%.
Probably.
And there's the fearfulness that on the upcoming Senate race that your U.S. senator that's coming up in 18 will face this same kind of changed and evolved political shift.
I've been in politics a long time, and I sort of can read what's transpiring. I don't believe that the people who elected Trump are going to be able to
unseat McCaskill.
Oh no, I don't think they're going to do that, and I don't think that they're going to be able to maintain those Republican seats that give them majority now in the Senate, and because the people, a lot of the people that voted for Trump, they expect their representatives to have a little courage,
right?
And to be honest, and these Republicans trying to defend the foolishness that's going on now with this man who's thoroughly unfit to serve in that position has to be upsetting a lot of decent people who are intelligent. Now, you can be decent and be a fool, but the majority of the people that vote, and especially in the northern communities, are intelligent.
Well, we shall see. 18 is coming upon us rapidly.
Right.
Bill Clay, former congressman from the great city and county of St. Louis, the great state of Missouri. Thank you so very much for sharing these thoughts and bringing history, and to me, bringing history that I did not know even existed. Thank you so very much for participating.
Well, thank you for having me on, and I look forward to seeing.
We're gonna make sure you get a copy of this tape too, so you'll see how well you did.
All right. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much.
Yes.